The late great H.R. GEE-GUR, a Swiss artist that you might not be entirely familiar with, but you've definitely been exposed to a few of his works through various forms of media that he was involved with. Whether it's the instantly recognizable xenomorphs in the Alien movies that he designed, the multitude of musical artists that have commissioned him to make artwork for their album covers, and in some cases even mic stands, or, of course, video games, with the most recent example being Ep Software's Scorn, released in 2022. Even though he wasn't involved with it in any way, his entire legacy heavily shaped Scorn's unique and surreal art style. However, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that Scorn wasn't the only game that had a deep admiration for GEE-GUR's work. There's countless others, but there's one in particular that always stood out to me, one that was a cut above the rest when it comes to peculiarity, and that's none other than Darkseed. A point-and-click adventure that was released in 1992 and developed by Cyberdreams, a studio based in California that was founded by Patrick Ketchum and Ralph Klug with programmer John Krause. Throughout the company's short 7-year lifespan, it never seemingly managed to grow out of being a small game studio that was almost always understaffed, but despite that, Cyberdreams still left a notable footprint on the game industry. They accomplished this by constantly collaborating with popular artists and building games centered around their work, which allowed them to stand out from their contemporaries in a rather unique way. A year after Darkseed was released, Cyberdreams would partner with Sid Mead, best known for designing the world of Blade Runner, to make the game Cyber Race. Then, in 1995, they collaborated with author Harlan Ellison to develop a video game adaptation of his book I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. All of these artists had varying degrees of involvement with their respective projects. GEE-GUR unfortunately played a pretty minuscule role during Darkseed's development, which after the game's release he'd go on to say that despite loving it, he was rather disappointed by the fact that he barely contributed to it in any meaningful way. About the only thing he did was giving a thumbs up for his artwork to be used, suggesting that the game's resolution should be increased to avoid his art from looking jagged and blurry, as well as providing guidance on how his art should be used within the context of the game. Which, upon booting Darkseed up for the first time without having any idea what it's about, you know, there's really not a whole lot of context here to begin with. I've already played a section of the intro earlier, but I'm gonna play it again in its entirety because 1, not only do I think it's one of the sickest openings to a game I've seen, but 2, it's just bizarre in every way imaginable. It really gives you a good idea of what to expect from this game. Alright, so you've got this UFO swooping in to drop down the letters of the game's title while this very ominous tune plays in the background. After that, it goes straight into the credits with a front shot of this manor looking like it was taken right off of a Zillow page with another ominous tune playing, only this time it's not nearly as ominous. I don't know, the way this entire thing is composed gives me some old-timey sitcom vibes and I really love it for that reason. And then you've got your first cutscene with what seems to be our main character getting an alien embryo inserted into his head through that. Yeah, pretty on brand for GEE-GUR. And it turns out that was all just a bad nightmare, but now our little protagonist won't shut up about his blistering headache.
My head is killing me. My head feels like it's going to explode. These nightmares have given me a mean headache. It seems like I've had this headache since I moved in. Boy, my head hurts.
I suppose I should properly introduce you to this dude. This is Mike Dawson, played by the game's writer, Mike Dawson. Yeah, he's essentially a self-insert, I guess you could say, and this character sprite you see in-game is actually a digitized version of the man himself. It's pretty funny. Though apparently it wasn't originally planned to be like this. Mike Dawson had the entire main character all figured out during early development, but couldn't think of a name for him, so he just wrote his own as a placeholder. His boss liked it, and, well, the rest is kind of history. Though Dawson later went on to say that the approval could have partially been done due to budgetary reasons. Since Cyberdreams is already a small company that spends a lot to get big name artists to help with their projects, they probably never really had a lot of financial wiggle room to spend money on other things like actors. It was a lot more cost effective for them to just use Mike Dawson because he already worked for the company. From the get-go, there's not really a whole lot you can gather from Mike Dawson, the character. All you know is that he's got constant nightmares, he recently just moved into this house, and he already hates it.
These leather-bound books remind me of my book collection still in storage. That's kind of unsettling. That's a chilly draft blowing through this decrepit old living room. I better not eat anything coming from this kitchen until the cleaning lady has disinfected it.
Self-inserts rarely ever turn out good, but I think this is one of those rare instances where it worked out amazingly well. The reason being is that it's fairly obvious that Mike Dawson is about as far removed from his real-life counterpart as you can get. The only similarities that they have is that they're both writers and that they both share the same likeness. That's about it. And look, I don't know the man personally, but I'd find it hard to believe that he's about as dopey as he is in-game, yet that's also what makes his character so lovable and unforgettable. Mike Dawson, the character, never stops talking. Everything, no matter how innocuous or insignificant it may seem, he'll provide commentary for it in the most overly verbose way possible. The funniest and most notorious example of this being the first time you walk into a grocery store.
What a quaint general store with a little bit of everything for day-to-day existence.
Also, like I've said earlier, with a game that has an opening this bizarre, it's very fitting to have a character as odd as Mike. A lot of other aspects of the game reflect that kind of tone pretty well too. Like the MIDI music tracks, which as simple as they may sound, they can also come off as a bit eerie and at times anxiety-inducing, especially that repetitive tune that constantly loops while you're walking around Dawson's house. And the gameplay, which forces you to interact with the environment, can sometimes put you into scenarios that are just wildly absurd and almost cartoonish. There's a part in the game where you can just waltz right into the police station and grab the gun right off the wall without anyone caring. You can also walk right into the cemetery and rub your greasy hands on all the tombstones while Dawson occasionally stops to contemplate what he's doing.
The stone feels cold and slippery. J. McKeegan. Have I no respect for the dead?
And while we're on the topic of being completely disrespectful to the dead, you can also stroll into a family mausoleum and clumsily knock over every single urn.
Great, now I have Leonard all over me. Great, now I have Cousin Gary all over me. Great, now I have Ma Julia's ashes all over me. Great, now I have Grandpa Pat all over me. There's a clock key among the ashes. Great, now I have twin ashes all over me.
Also, I almost completely forgot about this, but like 5 minutes into the game, the mailman shows up at your front door and this happens. Which only further goes to show you just how much of a fever dream Darkseed is. I guess now is also a good time to mention that I kind of don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. So far, one half of the game is just me goofing around, bumbling through like the 4 different locations that are in this town and seeing what kind of trouble I can throw Dawson into, while the other half is the game flashing stuff like this at me without any explanation and then just not knowing what to make of it. I mean, I know there's like puzzles to solve here, but I don't even know where to begin. Hold on a sec. Since I have a gun in my inventory, I've got a little bit of an idea.
I don't have any bullets.
That's 110710. Yes, sir, and they have the car stopped at 10th and Grant. You might go by there first.
What a cold Never thought I'd be spending a night in here.
Well, damn, now I'm completely clueless as to what I'm supposed to do here. There's not a whole lot I can interact with. There's this mug I can pick up. Oh, never mind, something's happening. Oh, okay, I died, I guess. Alright, so one of the biggest issues with Darkseed is that you have about an hour and a half to complete the entire game, otherwise that alien that got inserted into Mike's head in the very beginning bursts out, killing him in the process. And there's nothing that tells you that this is something you need to worry about, it'll just happen and abruptly end your entire game. It's a pretty poor design choice, and the exact reason why it was added in the first place wasn't ever made clear, but Dawson did eventually state that it was likely done in a cheap effort to make the game a touch more difficult. And to be brutally honest, it was completely unnecessary. It's already hard enough to complete this game without a walkthrough. There are so many things you have to remember, so many puzzles you have to solve that are just ludicrously cryptic, then trying to solve them in an order that is the most optimal and time efficient so you can get around an invisible time limit, all the while making sure you don't accidentally softlock yourself in the process, which is exactly what happened to me here. It was actually impossible for me to get out of this screen because I didn't have the lawyer's business card, which you unexpectedly get by buying this one bottle of scotch at the grocery store.
Hi, you must be Mike. I'm your neighbor, Delbert. Why don't we get together tomorrow? I'll meet you outside your place at 6. You're a writer, huh? I'm a lawyer by trade. Why don't you take one of my cards?
This isn't the only time the game makes a regular mundane item that any Joe Schmo will easily ignore into a necessity that you absolutely need to obtain in order to win. In fact, the other examples of this happening are even more outlandish than this. Like there's one in the library. Can you spot it? No? Here, let me zoom in a little for you. Still can't see it? I'll zoom in just a bit more. Give up? Alright, it's this thing right here. This straight line consisting of about maybe 3 black pixels, believe it or not, is a bobby pin, and if you fail to ever pick it up, about an hour into your game you'll be completely stuck yet again, rotting away in a jail cell, only this time it's in the dark world. A dimension where GEE-GUR's art really shines that you can travel to using this mirror in Dawson's living room once you obtain the missing broken shard for it about halfway through the game, which you get by just waiting until 10 AM on the second day for the mailman to show up and deliver it to you. That is, if you've already completed the entire sequence of puzzles you had to do the day before, which I won't really go into because it's a lot and it's also really not all that interesting. Though thankfully you do get a lot of backstory as to what exactly is going on here. As it turns out, the people of the Dark World, also known as the Ancients, have been planning on taking over the regular world. Their method of accomplishing this is by implanting that alien embryo into Dawson's skull, which once born will destroy all of humanity. This is all eventually revealed to you by the only friendly Ancient known as the Keeper of Scrolls, who also provides some useful tips prior to you visiting the Dark World. The most important one being that the Dark World is a direct reflection of the regular world, meaning that any items placed or doors open in the regular world will also be left opened or placed in the Dark World. A very interesting idea in theory, but in execution it's a little annoying to deal with. It's a pain having to walk through the Dark World, get to a door that you can't open because you forgot to open it in the regular world, walk back to the exit, walk to the corresponding door, open it, then waddle all the way back to where you were. I guess the amount of time I wasted by doing all of that is punishment for me not remembering this, but to be honest, this really comes off as more of an inconvenient gimmick than something that really adds to the gameplay. However, this whole mechanic is pushed to its absolute limit around halfway through your second day. After spending some time grave robbing, you return back to your house only to be confronted by an officer right at your front door, and then you get thrown in jail for some unspecified reason. Now yes, at this point you should have the lawyer's business card, and it is your one-time get out of jail free card if you give it to the cop, but hold on to it for a little bit because there's something else they need to do here. You have to put these 3 specific items under the pillow of your bed: money, glove, and bobby pin. Don't bother asking how you're ever supposed to figure that out on your own, but just make sure you do it, because not only are these items essentially the last 3 things you need to beat the entire game, but shortly after this you have to turn yourself into the Dark World Police and get put in jail where your entire inventory will be completely wiped except for those items that transferred over. If you forget about this step or place the wrong items down, you are absolutely screwed. You'll either be completely stuck here or you'll only be able to progress up to a certain part until you're basically forced to reload an old save, or worst case scenario, restart the entire game. And how exactly do you use those 3 items to finish the game? Well, obviously you need the bobby pin to lockpick your way out of jail, and this is the only puzzle in this last sequence that isn't totally nonsensical. But then you need to give it to this alien prisoner who rewards you with an invisibility headband they need to wear in order to get past this thing. Then make your way back to the regular world. Oh god, what is it now? Hey, yo, Mikey, now's definitely not the time to be taking a nap. I kinda really need you to be doing some stuff right now. What? Are you serious? I died just like that? I don't even know what happened there. I sure as hell didn't run out of time. Am I just not allowed to spend too much time in the dark world? Is that what it is? I don't even know. The lack of any explanation is killing me here. Okay, whatever. Thankfully, I saved earlier. Alright, where was I? Right, make your way back to the regular world, go to the grocery store, use your money to buy another bottle of scotch, and use that scotch to fuel an old car that Mike has in his garage. I don't think that's how that works, but sure, whatever. Then fire up the car, which also powers up a control center in the dark world. Pull this lever using a pair of gloves, otherwise you'll get electrocuted, and then this happens. Yeah, again, I don't really know what I just did, and I'm pretty tired of trying to make sense of this game. All I know is that it was a pretty necessary step to take, because now I can finally smash the Dark World mirror with a hammer. I didn't really want to get into the nitty-gritty of all of that, but I think it should give you a good idea of just how much of a process it is to finish this entire game. A process that is filled with puzzles that sometimes don't even make a lick of sense, and design choices that make the game a total mess. And a process that apparently Dawson had to go through to finally sell his house. I would have drawn the line at it being filled with a bunch of creepy old junk, or the kitchen needing to be disinfected, or hell, if there was a correlation between the house and all the nightmares and headaches, I would have sold it then without a second thought, but hey, that's just me. But honestly, after all of that, I can't exactly say Darkseed is terrible. In fact, out of all the games I've played previously on this show, this one seems to have the most going for it. Sure, the gameplay is incredibly flawed, but I still had some fun playing it, and there's a reason why I remembered it even though it's been around 10 years since I've watched PBG's video on it. If there's one thing that Darkseed did incredibly well is its atmosphere. Like I've said, the game is just unforgettably odd, like Mike Dawson being a very unordinary and quirky character, the music being somewhat creepy, and even just the concept of the game itself. All of it together gives Darkseed a very unique and uncanny vibe that is somewhat hard to really explain, but it's something that's really stuck with me. And seemingly, even Cyberdreams themselves saw the potential in Darkseed by making a sequel to it 3 years later, this time with GEE-GUR being much more involved in the project. Unfortunately, Mike Dawson didn't reprise his role as, Mike Dawson in this, and an even bigger blow is that this was the last game Cyberdreams released until becoming a third-party publisher and eventually shutting their doors around early 1997. Both the Darkseed wiki and the Game Nostalgia Facebook page state that this was because Ralph Klug, the owner of Cyberdreams, wanted to focus on other business ventures, which, yes, sounds legit, but I'm not totally satisfied with that answer, and I suspect that there's more to it than that. As you already know, Cyberdreams had a huge reluctance when it came to using in-house artists. For all of their games, they collaborated with bigger, well-known artists to support their projects, which in the short term probably worked out really well. This was their thing, it's what made them stand out in the market. But long term, however, I think they were starting to lose more money than gaining it with this business strategy. According to this Amiga magazine published in 1993, Darkseed's budget was $600,000, with most of that going straight to GEE-GUR, which is a pretty hefty amount, especially considering the fact that this was Cyberdreams' first game. How much they spent with other artists is unknown as far as I can tell, but I think it'd be safe to assume it's roughly in the same ballpark. So imagine that figure, but spent 3 or maybe even 4 more times with a cancelled Dungeons & Dragons game with co-creator Gary Gygax involved, and you can see what I'm talking about, right? Admittedly, there's not a whole lot that backs up my theory on this, apart from one Unseen64 Tumblr post I found about a cancelled FPS game known as Reverence, that was being developed by a company known as 3 Space Imagery and was going to be published by Cyberdreams. It was canned sometime around its alpha stage because of supposed financial issues that struck Cyberdreams. Also, I keep seeing a lot of talk about how Cyberdreams becoming a third-party publisher was a decision that was forced upon them by investors. Everywhere I look, whether it's the Darkseed wiki, Moby Games, Unseen64, and even the company's own Wikipedia article, there's always this mention of an internal shakeup that happened in 1995, where investors reportedly removed the company's entire management team and replaced it with one that would help transition Cyberdreams into a third-party publisher. A year later, Patrick Ketchum left, selling 50% of his interest to Ralph Klug, and then was later replaced by one Paul Licari. Call me crazy, but I think there might be some sort of a connection here. With the amount of money that Cyberdreams puts into all of their games to get some big name artists to help them out, only for that game to turn out to be a bit of a sleeper hit, or in the case of I Have No Mouth, a modest seller and even a commercial failure, I can imagine this probably infuriated the company's investors. To them, Cyberdreams most likely seemed very unreliable, and because of that, they felt it'd be more beneficial if the company primarily became a third-party publisher. They stuck with that decision as a sort of last-ditch effort, only for it to fail miserably. Now keep in mind, this is all just a theory. Probably one that's brain dead, but I don't think it's completely far-fetched, and there definitely was something bigger than a loss of interest that led to the company's closure. I also find it really interesting just how popular this internal shakeup claim is, yet I actually can't trace it back to an official source, so I'm really curious to know where this whole thing came from and if it's even factual. The only things about it that are unequivocally true is that Ketchum did indeed leave the company in '96, selling his interest to Klug, and that he eventually was replaced by Licari. Fortunately, it wasn't all doom and gloom, however. Mike Dawson jumped ship way before it started sinking, and he went on to build a pretty impressive resume for himself. He became an instructor of game programming at UCLA, then becoming a course director at the subject at the Los Angeles Film School. He's written several books on learning different programming languages, and he was even credited for writing 2 episodes of the show Family Matters. Shortly after leaving Cyberdreams, Patrick Ketchum returned to his lifelong passion of photography. He's been building his career for roughly over 20 years now, and for a short while he specialized in real estate photography, having taken photos of over 2,000 properties according to his About section of his photography website. Would it be possible for Darkseed to get out of its Abandonware state? Honestly, yeah, I think if there was enough demand for it, it'd be very much within the realm of possibility for a company much like Night Dive Studios to come by, optimize, and re-release it for newer systems, which they've already done for numerous other point-and-click adventure games, one of which even being Cyberdreams' I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And unlike something as ridiculously niche as Hugo, Darkseed isn't totally forgotten about, and I think it did garner a small cult following through the help of other YouTubers who've covered it, like PBG, Pushing Up Roses, Red Super Ray, and more recently Madular, all of which have made amazing videos on the game, and I very much recommend watching them if you haven't already. Darkseed might not be all around enjoyable, but there are definitely things to be enjoyed here, and it is clear that some amount of passion was put into making it. Because of that, I think it's a little unfortunate that it, along with Cyberdreams, ended the way they did. Not trying to say that this is some hidden gem you're missing out on, but despite all of its glaring flaws, there's a part of me that thinks that Darkseed is a game that's at least worth experiencing.